Donald Trump has no objection to seeing Confederate flags in the Confederate states that waged war against the United States of America and killed more Americans than the Mexican army ever could have in our war with Mexico. Donald Trump wants to honor the most treasonous people who have ever lived in this country. Donald Trump spoke at Fort Bragg today, an Army base whose name was changed in the Biden administration when someone finally realized that naming American Army bases after generals who committed treason and killed American soldiers is not the best idea. General Braxton Bragg was a Confederate general who committed treason and killed as many Americans as he possibly could while committing that treason during the Civil War. And Donald Trump restored the name Bragg to that fort to honor the committing of treason and the murdering of American soldiers.
For a little breaking news, we are also going to be restoring the names to Fort Pickett, Fort Hood, Fort Gordon, Fort Rucker, Fort Polk, Fort A.P. Hill, and Fort Robert E. Lee.
That's how much he cares about law and order. All of those forts used to be named after all of those Confederate generals, all of whom committed treason against the United States and murdered American soldiers. And Donald Trump wants to restore those names. You just heard Donald Trump honoring that murderous, treasonous general, Robert E. Lee. That is the same Robert E. Lee who became the Confederate leader dedicated to killing American soldiers. It is the same Robert E. Lee who committed treason the first day of the Civil War by joining the Confederacy. Robert E. Lee cannot be forgiven as a man of his time who simply missed the moral dimensions of what was happening because no one in his Virginia circle saw the moral dimensions the way we do now. How then do we explain Robert E. Lee's sister, who sided with the North in the Civil War and whose son joined the Union Army, or Robert E. Lee's nephew who joined the Union Army? And what about 40% of Virginia's officers who remained in the service of the Union Army? Robert E. Lee owned slaves, beat slaves, and sold individual members of slave families to different buyers. Robert E. Lee did every vile thing that slave owners did at that time when honorable and decent people around the world knew that slavery was evil. No one in American history has been more guilty of treason than Robert E. Lee. In an 1865 editorial in the New York Times, it said, Robert E. Lee has levied war against the United States more strenuously than any other man in the land, and thereby has been guilty of the crime of treason as defined in the Constitution of the United States. And 3 days later, Robert E. Lee was indicted for treason. But generals are especially generous to generals, and General Ulysses S. Grant interceded with President Andrew Johnson to get the treason case against Robert E. Lee dropped. Robert E. Lee killed more American soldiers than Hitler did. And Donald Trump wants to honor him. Donald Trump today told an audience of American soldiers that he wants to honor Robert E. Lee with, quote, Fort Robert E. Lee. There was exactly one day in Donald Trump's time as president when he needed to call in federal troops, where he was empowered without checking with anyone to call in federal troops in the place where no governor is involved, Washington, D.C., and Donald Trump didn't do it. Rioters beat.
We need to hold the doors of the Capitol. I need Pence support.
Donald Trump pardoned every one of those Trump supporters who were trying to kill those police officers. Every one of those Trump supporters who wanted to go and kill Mike Pence. For 187 minutes that day, Donald Trump did absolutely nothing, and he never, ever for a second considered trying to stop his supporters from trying to beat and kill police officers. It was the Vice President of the United States who technically, without authority, took over and ordered the American military into action on January 6th at the Capitol. General Mark Milley testified to the January 6th committee. Vice President Pence was very animated, and he issued very explicit, very direct, unambiguous orders. There was no question about that. And I can get you the exact quotes, I guess, from some of our records somewhere, but he was very animated, very direct, very firm to Secretary Miller: get the military down here, get the Guard down here, put down this situation, etc. Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn wishes the troops got there sooner.
Until then, I had never seen anyone physically assault Capitol Police or MPD, let alone witness mass assaults being perpetrated on law enforcement officers. I witnessed the rioters using all kinds of weapons against officers, including flagpoles, metal bike racks that they had torn apart, and various kinds of projectiles. Officers were being bloodied in the fighting. Many were screaming, and many were blinded and coughing from chemical irritants being sprayed in their faces. I sat down on a bench in the rotunda with a friend of mine who was also a black Capitol Police officer and told him about the racial slurs I endured. I became very emotional and began yelling, "How the blank could something like this happen? Is this America?" I began sobbing.
Joining us now is former U.S. Capitol Police Officer